There we go. Hello, everybody. I'm Peter Kirkwood, and we're here today to talk about the strategies that companies in the identity space use to differentiate themselves. To kind of set up the question before we get started, we'll do introductions right after that. We all know this is a fast-growing market with a huge amount of value, 15% growth rate, a lot of venture capital coming in and new startups happening all the time. So people see a lot of opportunity. But what I see is a lot of companies that compete, but have a lot of the same claims. So it's not clear how well they're really differentiating and finding different ways to go after this market. So talking about examples of how that's being done well and where there's a lot of opportunity for differentiation is kind of the strategic question I wanted to chat about today. Before we go any further, let's do a round of introductions. I'll start. I'm Peter Kirkwood. I'm a strategy professional with over a decade experience in this field, focused on helping companies find and accelerate their growth strategies. Jay, would you like to go next?
Sure. Thanks for having me. I'm Jay Meier. I'm the Senior Vice President of North American Operations for a company called FaceTec. We are a global leading provider of three-dimensional facial liveness and biometric matching technology. Prior to that, I worked in various capacities in investment banking and investment research, focusing on the space.
Excellent, thanks. Mark, you want to go next?
Sure, absolutely. My name is Mark DiFraia. I'm a SVP of Digital Identity for a company called KUMA. We're a consulting group that focuses on digital identity, privacy, and cybersecurity. And I've got some legacy in the identity space with companies like Idemia, MorphoTrust, L1, mobile driver's license, and handheld device-oriented authentication.
Excellent, thank you. Shiraz?
Yep, I'm Shiraz Kapadia. I'm the CEO and president of Invixium. We are a Toronto-based company. We manufacture, biometric solutions primarily for, healthy access these days, and access control prior to that, and workforce management, and defining solutions. Meaning we have hardware products as well as software, and we have other services. So that's what we provide to the marketplace.
Great, thank you. So let's start off with your thoughts on kind of the thesis for this, and that's, is there enough differentiation in the market? Do customers see the different providers for these solutions as having distinct positions, or is it more competing on the same elements?
I think, it's that's what, when you reached out to me, Peter, this is a fantastic question, actually. And, that was one of the premises why, we did what we did and we started this company. And I believe that there is a, we call it different things. There is a price war, and, there is a feature war. And, I think the entire identity space, and, if I may use the word, biometrics, I know identity is larger than that, but, at least on the biometric side, it has all been about, features, and, some call, biometrics an industry in itself. I personally don't call it an industry. It's a feature of a larger space, which is, identity. And the one fundamental flaw, I think that I saw personally, and I think that others are seeing, is that different players were not about solving the actual problem end to end. It was a lot of finger pointing. Well, I do 20% of this, I do 30% of that, I do 60% of that, and the poor customer is saying, well, you know what? It's not that I don't want to work with you, I just don't want to work with this industry. And that's why a lot of the a lot of the antiquated aspects, people say, everything, that the way we order food, the way we book hotels, everything is modernized, and this identity industry remains antiquated. Customers are fine using a plastic card or those pin pads that were invented 40, 50 years ago. I think it's our own fault. I think the entire industry is not about solving a problem. It's about, I have this feature and I have that feature, and I can compete with you on price. I'm North American made, and come on, people, like, let's just, solve problems. Right.
Right.
That's
Yeah,
what I think.
Nice.
I couldn't agree with you more. If you don't mind, Peter, I'll jump in on this one.
Please.
As you put out a couple of stats about how fast this market's growing and how exciting it is. And one of the unfortunate things that comes along with that is it gets flooded with investment capital in a lot of widgets, and widgets make for a noisy marketplace that's hard to navigate. And customers don't want to buy widgets. They want to buy answers. They're looking to solve problems, and they want to do business with a customer. They don't want to be in the business of verifying identities or authenticating identities. They're a necessary evil to what's going on. So unfortunately, not everybody in the space has a clear understanding of that. They get wrapped up in the science and all those fun things about algorithms and speeds and feeds and things like that. But ultimately, the buyer is trying to do business with a customer. And these things are obstacles that have to be overcome in order to do business with that customer. So I tend to think of things in two categories. And one side of it are kind of the point in time, single use, single method, single modality kind of solutions that will have their moment in the sun and then they quickly burn out and they move, and then the game moves to another field.
Mhm.
And then there are the ones that can dynamically grow and shift over time. And that doesn't mean that a certain authenticator can't grow and shift over time. It can, but it certainly has to have, the companies to have their eyes on the ball when it comes to that. Offering a specific thing and believing that it's going to be there forever and be the be all end all that someone's going to run their whole identity operation around is a pretty naive stance. Orchestration and moving with the desire of the customer to see things get more passive and more dynamic so that they can adjust and shift over time is where the premium is. That's at least from what we're seeing.
Gotcha. Jay?
Sure, it's an interesting question. I've been watching this industry since about 1990, and I've covered one way or another most of the players in this space. And I have to tell you, I've seen the industry go through numerous false starts, followed by a roll up where somebody comes in and buys a bunch of practically bankrupt companies that couldn't sell technology to anybody. And I think the reason is because no one has really solved a major problem in an identity management system. And so what we have had is a lot of companies jumping in, like Mark said, chasing money with Me Too products, right? Identity management systems, for example, that just aggregate someone else's intellectual property doesn't offer a whole lot of value, okay? It's the intellectual property and the expertise that actually drives performance and creates a value for a customer. So today, with identity theft and fraud and especially during the pandemic, we're seeing all these companies show up that claim to be identity management companies, but they really don't do anything except connect disparate pieces. The pieces are important. What's not important is connecting them all together, okay? So to me, I think you have to follow valid intellectual property, find companies that actually know how to solve a problem and explain to customers exactly what the problems are, because most of the time these customers don't even know what the problems are. And so we're in an interesting time. There's a lot of unique technology out there right now. I happen to think that FaceTec is one of them. And we may finally be seeing this industry actually doing something meaningful so that we don't have just another false start / roll up. Make sense?
It does, and I hope you're right. I mean, the magnitude of the challenge, the economic cost of fraud, the friction in the economy, it's worth solving. I think that's why we're all passionate about the space.
Well, I don't think people have really. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, what I was going to say is, it's the, like, all three of us have, touched about, solving a problem, and, literally magic happens, even if it's the smallest of problem that you're trying to solve, but as long as you're solving it end to end, like, we want to remain in the swim lane. Like, everybody's trying to do everything, and identity is such a massive field. And
Right.
there are access control, there is workforce management, there is cybersecurity, there is so much, national ID and criminal ID, and
Right.
you try to do everything, and there's nothing wrong in doing everything. It's just like, the customer, you present 1 hour slide deck to a customer, and unless you are able to answer that one question that is going on in the customer's mind, it's like, so what? Like, unless you can answer that question, it's all meaningless.
So,
Right.
You know what? I
Sure,
think
go
that
ahead,
there's,
yeah.
I'm sorry, I'll try and be brief.
Yeah.
I think that there's a lot of the devil, the situation is really the devil in the details, right? The nuance of these technologies tends to make or break the technology, make or break the modality. And there's a lot of organizations out there that simply don't really understand the nuance about it. They may have come up with something that sounds kind of neat and tricky, but it really fails because it doesn't have some unique feature about it that can actually solve those problems. And then there's a lot of other companies that have massive sunk costs in legacy technologies that didn't work then and they don't work now. And just because you can pass the NIST, successfully go through some NIST test, doesn't mean you're actually able to solve a problem for a customer.
that's an interesting point, because by far the most common claim you hear from virtually every company is that we're the most accurate. Which,
So what?
I'm sure that, well, exactly.
Yeah, at what cost,
Have we gotten
right?
to a point where that claim isn't worth making anymore, where it's really move on to a new topic?
Well,
No.
one of the things I see, Peter, on this one is that the claim is hard to prove, right? Because once you leave the federal marketplace and you've got things like 863-3 ruling the day and how everything is supposed to work, it's a free-for-all, right?
Mhm.
If you're going to sell solutions outside the federal government that do document authentication or facial recognition, Jay, you can speak to that probably ad nauseum because you're so deep into it, or any of the other factors that you're going to try to bring to the table. If the customer deems it good enough, they can buy it. And unless they've got a KYC requirement or an AML requirement that they're trying to meet, which many of these verticals don't, it's hard for them to understand what they're buying, right? Because how do you take the cover off of it, look inside and see what the algorithm does and know that it's
Right.
better or side by each or whatever else? And quite honestly, do they care, or do they want plausible deniability that they did a good enough job of trying to
Right.
authenticate or verify an identity before doing business with a person? So, in my opinion, I think once you've left those markets where things like FICAM certification or Kantara certification rule, it becomes all about user experience, right? Yeah, you're the most accurate, but I can't get any of my customers through it. I turned away way too many of the customers that my marketing team just paid $100 to bring to my front door, and now I got to turn them away because they didn't pass through whatever filter you just put them through, or they didn't like the user experience, so they dumped out, right? That's where the rub is, I think, is more about whether you strike a balance of usable and accurate.
I'm reminded of an old joke, and I promised my boss that I was going to drop this joke, and I'm going to drop it. The joke is, what's the difference between a biometric salesman and a used car salesman? And the answer is the used car salesman knows what's wrong with the car. Okay. And that's where we are. Okay. Well, we can talk about user experience, but the fact is that this industry has been focusing on user experience for decades and has not been able to solve a problem. We've been trying to trinketize and lower the ASP on these technologies so that, and make it easier for people to navigate through so that they don't have any friction. Well, guess what? We're still talking about whether or not the password is dead, okay? The password is not dead, and the reason is because we haven't come up with a solution that actually displaces it. User experience is important, but security is becoming increasingly important, and $69 billion in fraud related to the pandemic is pretty compelling. One of the things that FaceTec does, and I'm glad you brought that up, Mark, about the secondary market outside of federal government. FaceTec has a thing called that we call a spoof bounty program. And we stand up our technology and we openly invite people to try and hack through it. And if you can beat our technology, we'll pay you $100,000. It's one of the best R&D facilities we have. In 2 years, we've had 51,000 or so attacks, and we've paid out twice, and that's it. And we've closed those vulnerabilities, and now, we think we can put our money where our mouth is, and hope other companies can kind of do the same thing, frankly.
I really like that point, and putting money behind it is a great way to show that there's so many claims that you can secure the data and prevent fraud. How do customers know that's true? If everybody makes the claim, says, we're not going to be cyber hacked or whatever, once they hear the claim from everybody, how do they value that? How do they make that a differentiator?
Well, I'll take that. I mean, the buyer, again, refer to that joke, right? If the salesman doesn't know what's wrong, the buyer may not know what's wrong, okay?
Yeah.
Sooner or later, people need to start thinking seriously about what they actually want, and preserving, a little bit of user friction is probably not going to be the main selling point, especially after somebody gets breached, right? User authentication is the vector that is responsible for about 75% of all data breaches out there, right? And weak user authentication, that has to change. The price of the fraud is becoming so mind-bogglingly large that finally the industry is starting to do something. Now, technology has had to change. NIST FRVT tests have been going on for decades and really haven't improved the capabilities very much. There are some technologies out there, we think we have one that actually solves major problems around accuracy.
Nice.
Shiraz,
Jay,
Jay, I'll jump in there, kind of throw a little counterpoint for you, just to kind of keep things interesting.
Right.
It depends on the audience, right? What NIST is trying to do is understand and put these things through their rigor from a speed and accuracy perspective that may not apply to everyone, right? So if I'm selling things to the Department of Defense that are going to help me find bad guys in nanoseconds using some new algorithmic approaches and some different uses of technology or some new innovations, those things certainly have their value, but they're not a value that necessarily everybody in the private sector needs. So it's a matter of scope, right? And right now, I'll tell you one of the things that we see at KUMA, because we're one of Kantara's assessors, right? We do FICAM certifications for folks. And we continue to see organizations that you wouldn't necessarily even associate with federal government coming to us looking for 63-3 certs. They want to get on the radar with those things. They might not be part of the NIST tests for algorithms and all that, but they want to get into the game of at least being on the radar screen with some measurement that they can hold up and say, at least there's a measuring stick, right? Because once you leave the world of that 63.3 or KYC standards, it's kind of that thing, in the land of the blind, the one-eyed man is king. There's at least some measurement of something that I can hold up to a customer and say, we're at least meeting a federal standard that you can read and understand. Right. If you want to have,
everybody's chasing the standard and chasing the rankings on this test, that's not differentiating. That's just everybody chasing the same ball.
There's a big difference between the test and 63.3, right? Okay. The test is all about how fast, nimble, accurate is the algorithm. And 63.3 is all about how well did you proof the identity and how well did you authenticate the identity when it's being used. Two very, very different situations. One is more systemic, one is more modality or multimodal specific, but it's all about the algorithm performance.
Yeah.
But
I don't disagree. Sorry.
is
Everybody's
identity
going.
is identity only about security? And there may be agreement to this. It may be more controversial, but I've if identity is all about security, then good Lord, God help the industry about adoption and about monetization and about the world using it, unless there is a complete balance of security and making security simple to use and putting a convenience factor into it. The adoption will never be there. And when we are describing to are only the global accounts or global customers are the customers of the identity industry, or we want everybody under the sun, every vertical to be a customer of the identity space. I think it's the latter. We want everybody to be to be using identity, right? And unless I use it in my organization and in various panels I've had, unless we can't simplify the pitch that is understandable by a 5-year-old, and no disrespect to a grandmother, we are going to remain a niche, and we're all going to be fighting competition from different regions, from Asia, from everywhere, and we are, as you said, Peter, like we're going to keep bumping into each other. You know me, I know you, and we know from L1, and 6 months from now or 2 years from now, we may still meet, but it'll be two different companies. Like it's
Right.
it's the same thing circling around. And
Yeah.
and I have found, like in the 9 years that we started this business, like even if you're solving a very small problem, but if you're solving a problem, magic happens.
Yeah.
You point out.
thing that we
Go
talk
ahead,
about.
Go ahead, Jay. I'll catch up afterwards. Go ahead.
I was just going to comment briefly about NIST again, and it's interesting that you bring up 63.3, Mark, because we're now talking about 63.4, right?
That's right.
And we just submitted our recommendations to that. One of the things that it's true. The NIST FRVT test, for example, and other tests seem to be like a Me Too kind of a thing. We're in the top 10. Well, last year we weren't, but this year we are, and next year we might not. That doesn't necessarily mean that those algorithms work as well as they need to. Okay, they work in the test lab that NIST designed. They work with a specific set of characteristics. Okay, and the problem is with something like NIST. Okay, and I love NIST. I've spent a lot of time at NIST test labs learning about this stuff. The problem with NIST, though, is that they are hamstrung statutorily. Okay, they only can work within certain budgets. They can only work within legislation that directs them to test on certain things. And as a result, NIST is actually 2, maybe 3 years behind the current threat vector. Okay, NIST is now just starting to learn about things like deep fake puppets and video injection problems. Okay, and these are the things, like in China, they stood up a platform, an identity management platform using face verification, and someone stole $75 million worth of currency almost overnight using a video, right? NIST is not the benchmark that it used to be, and it should not be that benchmark anymore, okay? Well, I can go on and on about that. We have a problem with NIST.
Tell you what, let's move away from accuracy a little bit and talk about what other things companies can differentiate on. Understanding your customer and their real problem. That sounds like a recurring theme. Are there other things that come to mind? One I can think of as being easy. Beautiful.
Become easy to do business with.
Yeah, that's a big deal. The vocabulary of this industry has been off-putting for a very long time. We speak in a jargon that is very hard for outsiders to understand. We throw IAL, AAL, we throw FICAM around, we throw 63.3 around, we throw biometric algorithm concepts around, we throw all kinds of different things, on the lap of the customer, and then try to explain them. It turns into, like you were mentioning, Shiraz, earlier on, if you're not careful, a sales meeting turns into a vocabulary education meeting as opposed to a real pitch meeting. And that's one of the things that I know we talk with our customers about, because they're trying to bring solutions to market and trying to help make sure that they understand that your customer is trying to do business. They're not trying to buy identity solutions. It's not what they're there for. They didn't wake up that morning hoping to death somebody would sell them some identity stuff. They hope that they win some new customers, and the cost of customer acquisition continues to go down. And if you're speaking in those languages, then they're going to be excited to talk with you. So those are the things that we try to keep people thinking of in order to
Sure.
get them to move ahead and add value. And if we want to get specific about some of them, when a customer is thinking about trying to solve this problem, Jay, you mentioned it. It's got multiple links in the chain. It's not about any one particular piece by itself. So once they start stitching the quilt together, all of a sudden the quilt gets pretty expensive. How much money am I going to spend to run through every element of my identity proofing or authentication or verification process in order to do business with this person? So what we need is some smart orchestration that calls the right tools to the table when the use case calls for it, and it's economically viable to do so. And that kind of dynamic interaction between the tools at the table and knowing when it's valuable and not valuable to call them into action is going to be critical.
I agree. It has to be simple. It has to be easy to use. It has to be economically viable for the stakeholders. And you don't want it to disrupt revenue flow to the company. There's been a lot of attempts to try and do that. You look at FIDO, for example, and the fast identity online deal. We don't think that really works for much because it really doesn't do much to make sure that the right person is holding the phone, but it does a really good job at making sure that it's the right phone. You know what I mean? So those types of trinkety solutions tend to work really well for low value transactions that you're trying to protect. And when I say a low value transaction, I mean the inherent value of the thing you're trying to protect, whether it's data or an actual, Visa transaction or something. But there has to be a capability to ensure that we know who this person is that's actually holding these devices. And we think that there's a new architecture coming around right now and we embrace it, where we assume that the government is the primary anchor of identity in these ecosystems. And so no longer, we don't think that the value play out there anymore is ease of use and fast and simple, because what we've seen is a lack of accuracy and a lack of security in those platforms. But once you embrace the idea that the federal government or a state government is actually the one that issues a legal identity, and it's the one that we need to ensure we know, then we can authenticate to that simply and easily. And it really only takes a client-side SDK and a server SDK to make a serious dent in these breach vectors. I think we're at a time in this industry where we're going to see a rapid adoption of technologies that can solve these problems. And that's the greatest thing about it right now, is that we haven't seen these solutions in the past. FaceTec is really an interesting play, and I know they're not the only one out there. So I think we're going to see this change. You're going to see the doppelgangers and the also rans come and go. They'll get rolled up or they'll go out of business. But if you follow the intellectual property and follow the real cutting edge solutions, you're going to see some real traction.
And fast paced, right, Jay? Like it's not like we can't, the world is moving at a very rapid pace. And if we can't maintain the pace at which we come out with technologies that become part of solutions, then you can't talk about, for example, face recognition, 3 years from now. The need is now. So
right.
Pace is super important.
It has to be quick and easy, and we like a software-based solution with a client side, with a client server and a client SDK and a server SDK, because it can deploy so rapidly. We don't have to have massive blade arrays with massive hardware to make this happen. It's cheap, it's easy, it is extremely effective if you do it correctly, and it actually solves some problems.
That's, go back to the comment I made about orchestration, and, you pointed out a couple of key things, whether it be FIDO or whatever. The reason why I think orchestration and solutions that have that baked in are going to be the big winners is because none of the things that were on that list were intended to stand alone as the solution to a problem, right? When I look at FIDO did a really great job of saying, this is how authenticators should play, right? An authenticator by nature requires you to have already proofed the identity or come to some level of comfort before you issue them an authenticator that you want to play back time and time again, right? So they brought the notion of keep the test at the edge and the orchestration at the middle so that the actual thing being authenticated was never pooled in a place where it could be stolen. And I like that a lot, but that only covers the authentication piece of the workflow, but it's very good at what it did. So if you want to authenticate by using face, if you want to authenticate by using eye color, or you've got purple hair or whatever the heck the authenticator might have, authenticating some other thing, you've got a token, whatever it is, that's a piece of the value chain that needs to be orchestrated. And that's why I keep coming back to that point, is that the customer is not going to rely 100% on a authenticator, single authenticator, 2, 3 authenticators. It's going to be the soup that's made when you proof an identity, issue it a means of being able to assert itself in a trustworthy way, and then grow with it over time, right? Because whatever authenticator we're using today or yesterday may be out of style within 6 months or 6 years, and we're on to something else. And the platform has to be able to support that migration without doing rip out and replace. I mean, that's where real premium is going to be, right? If I know I'm going to use it and it's disposable, I'm going to throw it out, I'm going to replace it with the new thing of the day, then that's your commodity, right? If I'm going to be able to use it, morph it over time, and it's going to adjust and shift with me as these things change and move, then that's where I'm going to pay premium.
I know we are over time, so I don't want to keep people all that late. If anyone has a closing thought, and then we'll sign off.
Just thanks, Peter. I mean, it's a fun conversation to have. Unfortunately, with COVID going on, we don't get to have as many of them
Exactly.
in the settings that we want to have them in. So, ordinarily we'd all continue this conversation at the bar afterwards, but we're not going to be able to do that today. But maybe you guys can do that at your own little home bar, and we'll pretend like we did next till we can do it in person. Next time we're all in the same place.
Sounds
Thanks
good.
for putting it together, Peter. Thank you.
Thanks,
Great.
Peter.
Thanks
Bye.
a lot, everybody.
Yeah. Take care. Bye-bye.